My name is Ruth Chandler, and in my family, that usually means the quiet one, the person you talk over while you refill your glass. Tonight, I held a water goblet so no one would ask why I wasn't drinking, and watched the room admire my brother-in-law in his pressed dress blues under the ballroom chandeliers. Marcus lifted his champagne and grinned toward our table. "Ruth shows up for the free food," he said, to easy laughter. But I'm not sure she could tell a rifle from a wrench. The laugh line rippled. My sister's smile froze for a second. Then she looked away. I steadied the glass with my thumb until the condensation streaked my skin, and let the sound pass through me like wind through a screen. Habit. Breathe in, let it go. Don't give them a story. A violinist dragged a sweet, forgettable melody across the room. Servers moved like metronomes. And in the doorway, a man stood too still. Everyone else had the looseness of celebration. Loosened ties, chairs angled open, knees pointed toward conversation. He had none of it. His gaze hopped. Exit, dais, exit, while his left sleeve held a strange weight. I took a sip I didn't want. The glass faintly tapped the rim of my tooth. My heart didn't spike, it narrowed. The edges of the room sharpened. The podium's scuffed corner, the security camera's lazy blink, the way Marcus's right hand rested on the small of my sister's back, like he owned the air around her. I set the goblet down and stood. No one noticed. That was fine. Being unnoticed is a kind of freedom if you know how to use it. Across the crowd, near the flags, an older officer I recognized from another life laughed at something he didn't find funny. I walked toward him, leaned close like a grateful relative, and in a voice I hadn't used in years, I gave him 6 quiet words. Then the room began to change. The sound of chairs scraping against the ballroom floor lingered in my ears long after the moment had passed. I sat back down, folded the napkin in my lap, and let everyone return to their chatter as if nothing had cracked open. That was always the rhythm, Marcus dazzling, Elena glowing at his side, and me blending into the wallpaper. It had been that way since we were children. Elna was the golden girl, quick to answer in class, graceful on the field, the one our parents boasted about to neighbors. I was quieter, slower to speak, better at noticing the details people missed. Back then, it seemed like a flaw. Teachers told me to project, to raise my hand, to show confidence. I learned instead to shrink. Easier for everyone. By the time Elena married Marcus, the pattern was cemented. He was loud, polished, always filling the room with anecdotes from deployments, half smiles, and the weight of medals. Family dinners became his stage. He'd lean back, balancing his chair on 2 legs, and tease me with lines meant to sting, but not enough for anyone to call him cruel. Ruth could get lost in her own neighborhood. Ruth has a talent for silence. They laughed, and I pretended not to mind. But silence doesn't mean absence. Sitting at those tables, I cataloged every glance, every bite left untouched, every story retold with gaps that widened each time. My mind kept records no one asked for. And yet, to them, I was still nobody. Tonight, though, something cracked in me. That man at the doorway wasn't just a stranger with nerves. His posture screamed rehearsal. I'd seen it before, too precise, too rigid, like someone waiting for a cue. My fingers twitched against the napkin, the old instinct rising uninvited. I looked at Marcus across the room, his voice booming as he toasted himself again. The contrast made my stomach twist. He had no idea that while he reveled in applause, the air behind him was shifting toward danger. My family still believed I was the shadow in the corner, the harmless sister who lived a quiet life. But in truth, I'd been trained for moments like this, when no one else was watching. And I knew that pretending not to see would cost more than just my pride. Long before tonight, I had learned the power of staying still. Years ago, when I wore a different uniform, stillness was survival. They called me Vera. I didn't choose the name. It was given after a training exercise where I caught a trap no one else noticed. while others pushed forward. I tapped 3 fingers against the table and walked out. Minutes later, the mock perimeter detonated. No one was hurt, but the lesson stayed. Sometimes silence is the loudest alarm. I was never the strongest or the fastest. I couldn't outshoot the sharpshooters or outpace the runners. What I had was something quieter. The ability to read people the way others read maps. A blink that lasted a fraction too long. The way weight shifted on uneven ground. The hesitation before a handshake. Those were my languages. And in the shadows of operations that never made the news, those details saved lives. One night in Eastern Europe, I stood in a hall much like this one, chandeliers swaying above polished floors. Diplomats raised their glasses and cameras flashed, but I was posted in the corner, unremarkable in a plain black dress. A guard's radio clicked twice instead of once. His gaze pulled again and again toward the balcony. I leaned toward my commander, an old Navy man with lines carved deep into his face, and whispered only 6 words. He didn't question me. His glass shattered against the wall, and seconds later, security swept through. The wine had been poisoned, slipped in by an imposter dressed as catering staff. The papers called it a diplomatic hiccup. The truth was something colder. After that, the commander stopped looking through me. He gave me a nod that carried more weight than any medal. But back home, no one knew. My family thought I was tucked away in an office, alphabetizing files. Marcus would joke about me playing secretary near the base, and I let him. Better that than drag them into the shadows I walked. Still, habits never leave. Even now, dressed like everyone else at this party, my eyes searched for the spaces between gestures. And tonight, the spaces told me danger was already in the room. The music swelled. Some bland instrumental piece meant to keep conversation light, but all I could hear was the static tension that never lied. The man at the doorway shifted his wrist, just enough for the cuff to catch the chandelier's glow. A flash of metal winked back at me. I rose, smoothing the fabric of my dress so no one would ask why. To anyone watching, I was stretching my legs, weaving politely through tables where laughter rose and fell like waves. But my steps had a straightness to them, a line aimed toward the cluster of officers near the flags. He was there, the commander I once whispered to overseas. His hair had thinned, his back a little more rigid, but the way he scanned a room hadn't dulled. He laughed at some junior's story, though his eyes never softened. He hadn't seen me yet, not like this, not as Ruth the sister-in-law in borrowed heels. I leaned in close, as if to offer a congratulatory greeting. My lips barely moved. 4th pillar. Left arm. Ready to fire. His head turned sharply, eyes locking on mine. For the briefest breath, the ballroom vanished, and we were back in a foreign hall, thick with smoke and suspicion. Then he said a single word that pulled the past into the present. Vera. The command was almost invisible, one finger raised. But within seconds, 3 men in suits peeled from the edges of the room. Guests gasped as they swarmed the stranger near the doorway, forcing him down before his hand could close around the weapon. A scream broke, glass shattered, and then silence slammed over us all. Marcus froze mid-toast, the champagne flute trembling in his hand. Elena clutched their daughter, eyes wide with a terror she couldn't name. And through it all, the commander never looked away from me. "She saved your life again," he said, voice low yet carrying across the marble floor. Dozens of faces turned toward me, faces that had known me for years, yet suddenly saw a stranger. My secret had cracked open in 6 words, and there was no going back. The room never quite settled after that. The attempted attack became the story on everyone's lips, whispered in corners, and replayed like a bad reel. But my attention was fixed on Marcus. While others trembled or muttered thanks to Providence, he didn't flinch. He set his glass down too carefully, eyes narrowing, not with fear, but calculation. It wasn't the reaction of a man grateful to be spared. It was something colder, the way a chess player studies the board after an unexpected move. I'd seen that look before, at a family barbecue last summer, when a news alert about stolen munitions flickered on the TV. Marcus had excused himself then, jaw tight, phone in hand. I thought little of it at the time. Another night, at a gala. He snapped at a colonel over a logistics report, then pasted on a smile when anyone glanced his way. Those moments had seemed unimportant, fragments scattered across months. But in the wake of tonight, they aligned like stars into a pattern I didn't want to see. Elena brushed his sleeve now, whispering something meant to soothe, but his eyes stayed sharp, scanning, as though he feared what might surface next. The commander spoke with aides, issuing orders, yet occasionally glanced toward me with that same knowing weight. I kept to the background, but my silence was no longer invisibility. I could feel their stares, guests trying to reconcile the woman who had been mocked as useless with the one who had just shifted the course of an evening. Marcus avoided my gaze, yet I caught the twitch in his jaw whenever my name was mentioned. It was a small tell, but I had built my life on reading tells, and it confirmed what my gut already whispered. Marcus Hale, family's shining star, wasn't simply a decorated officer. He was hiding something. The realization settled heavy in my chest. To doubt a stranger was instinct. To doubt blood was betrayal. Yet denial couldn't erase what I'd seen. The cracks in the hero facade were widening, and I knew I had to follow them, no matter where they led. I didn't confront him right away. Confrontation is noisy, and noise draws defenses. Instead, I slipped back into the habits I thought I had left behind. Late nights, quiet searches, connections to channels most people didn't even know existed. The first clue came from a set of transport logs. A crate of tactical radios marked for a battalion overseas never arrived. The paperwork said delayed, but the signature code belonged to Marcus's division. At first, it looked like an oversight, the kind of clerical mishap buried in bureaucracy. But patterns don't lie. When I traced the sequence of orders, the same anomaly appeared again. Helmets gone, medical supplies rerouted, body armor that vanished into thin air. I stared at those numbers until the screen burned into my eyes. To anyone else, it was noise. To me, it was a trail, and it led back, again and again, to Marcus. His name was never printed, but the authorization codes, the travel dates, and the sudden promotions around him built a frame only he could fill. It made me sick to remember his voice at family dinners, spinning stories of sacrifice, while somewhere soldiers stood exposed because gear meant for them had been siphoned away. I tried to imagine telling Elena, how could I? She still looked at him like he held the sun in his hands. And my niece, she clung to him as though he were unshakable stone. To shatter that image felt cruel, but the weight of silence pressed heavier. One evening, alone in my apartment, I scrolled back through old mission files stored on a secure drive I hadn't touched in years. The parallels were undeniable. I'd seen this kind of rot before. Officers who sold shadows of loyalty for promotions or favors. I wanted to believe Marcus was different. He was family, but the truth doesn't bend for blood. By the time dawn cracked across the blinds, my decision was set. I would keep watching, keep digging. Because if Marcus Hale was who the evidence said he was, then the man my family praised as a hero was nothing more than a traitor in dress blues. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening, long after the buzz of Marcus's promotion had faded into a new routine. We were gathered at Elena's house, the smell of roast chicken still hanging in the air, dishes stacked high in the sink. Laughter drifted from the living room, where my niece sprawled across the carpet with her coloring books. I found Marcus in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to his elbows, drying a plate as if he hadn't a care in the world. My hands trembled only once, before I laid the folder on the counter between us. He froze mid-motion, towel dangling. "What's this?" His voice was low, practiced calm. "You know what it is," I said. He opened the folder, eyes scanning the documents I'd collected. Logs, codes, manifests with red circles marking the lies. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. For a long moment, The only sound was the dripping faucet. Then he exhaled and shut the folder. Do you realize what this would do if it got out? To Ilana. To your niece. You'd burn this whole family down. I held his gaze, the weight of years pressing between us. How many families have already been burned, Marcus? How many soldiers stood waiting for armor that never came? His mouth opened, then closed. He finally said, almost pleading, it wasn't supposed to go this far. One favor turned into another. By the time I tried to stop, it was survival. Survival. The word caught sharp in my throat. Selling out the people who trust you. He leaned closer, his voice breaking into a whisper. Please, Ruth, keep this quiet. We can fix it. No one has to know. I looked past him, through the kitchen window, where the streetlights painted gold across Elena's curtains. My niece's laughter echoed faintly. That sound twisted like a knife. You want me to keep your secret, I said. But silence like this costs lives. And I won't carry that weight for you. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Not fear of exposure, fear of me. In that moment, I knew the choice was no longer tomorrow's problem. It was mine, now. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch with the folder still in my bag, staring at the ceiling as shadows crawled across it. Every reason to stay silent marched through my mind. Elena's laughter when she leaned against him. My niece's trust in his steady arms. The fragile scaffolding of a family that believed in Marcus as their anchor. But beneath all of that ran another sound, quieter yet stronger. The voices of those who would never come home because equipment they needed had been rerouted into the dark. I didn't know their names, but I carried them. Silence would mean carrying their ghosts too. At dawn, I brewed coffee, black and bitter, and opened my laptop. My hands didn't shake as I encrypted the files and sent them through the secure channel I still had access to. I didn't add an explanation, didn't sign my name. Truth didn't need decoration. 2 days later, Marcus was pulled mid-meeting into questioning. Word spread quickly, his clearance revoked, his access stripped. Elena's call came that night. She didn't scream or curse. Her voice was hollow, like the air had been punched from her lungs. Why would you do this, Ruth? Why would you tear us apart? I let her words settle before I answered. Redemption isn't a coupon, Elena. You don't get to cash it in when you're caught and expect everything to reset. There was silence on the line, heavy and trembling. Then she hung up. I sat there with the phone against my ear, listening to the dead hum. In the days that followed, people's opinions fractured. Some called me brave, others heartless. A few just looked at me like they didn't know who I was anymore. But I wasn't looking